What we're going to do now is, wasn't that an excellent word? My. That's wonderful. God's doing something wonderful. And pray that we'll walk out of this place with everything that He has intended for us to walk out with. We're going to spend the next session before lunch interviewing the two Scholtzes, and Mark and John, about the transition, handing the church over from father to son. So I had 5 minutes with them and said, okay, put that money on the table so that you want me to, if you want me to lean towards a certain direction. And so far, thing on the table, so I'll just ask whatever I want to. All right. John and Mark. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
I want to talk to you a little bit.
Be kind to us.
I want to be very kind to you. I want to talk to you a little bit this morning about the transition that you've gone through in this wonderful process of handing over. We talk about that, the idea or the ideal is that we, what we plant and what we grow ultimately will be handed over to sons. And here we've had a situation where that has happened. Of course, not as smooth always as we want it to happen. And so here is a situation. Now, I want to just go back a little bit. And so what we want to maybe emphasize a little bit this morning is how did it happen? How do you process the process and manage the change? If we can kind of, how do we process the process, this whole thing that needs to happen, and how do we manage that change? But take us back a little bit, John, because you didn't inherit such an easy situation, because in a certain sense, and I choosing carefully what we say, but it was from one almost flow of church life into a brand new family. Tell us a little bit about what you inherited and how you had to adjust that.
Yeah, I think what I inherited was a corporate structure, which was very much how church was, how it was structured back in the 70s and into the 80s. And so when I took over in 96, I inherited a corporation.
Yeah.
And God said to me, I'm going to turn the church upside down. And I didn't know what that meant, except when I looked back 10 years later, I realized he'd dug the corporate foundations out and he'd replaced what we had with family. Yeah. And I began to understand that church was very different. He'd done it. He said he would do that, and he did. And I'm very grateful to Church of the Nations and to Tony and the rest of the team, for all of you guys, for helping me to come to the place where I understood church as family. And therefore, what do I as a father do? And I remember standing on our stage many years back now, and I said to the church, you can no longer judge me as a CEO. I mean, you're welcome to, but I will never receive that judgment. I will never, ever again be judged on the basis of what was your strategy, how many people got saved, how, whatever it was, because it was so structured. And what I inherited was a situation where people could, I could say to people, jump, and they would say, how high must we jump, Pastor? And there was just something that never rang true in the gospel understanding, what I understood of God's Father heart. And so I said to the folk, you cannot, you're welcome to judge me like that, but I will not be judged by, have you been a good CEO of this company?
Became a family.
And it became a family. I said, what I will receive is this: have I been a good dad to this house? You can judge me on that. If I fail you as a father, then And so, what does that mean? And how do you then raise up the next generation of sons? And that's where it started.
So that took you some time. How many years did that shift take to?
That was 10 years to get away from a corporate structure. Yeah. And then not long after that, Keith and Don and I were sitting. They were, we worked closely together, leading the church, and we had a sort of a steering team of steering elders, and the three of us were sitting. And we were just sitting one day and said, reality is, 8 years down the line, I was going to be 65 or whatever it was, and we all got a shock and said, that's very scary, because I felt like I'd just come into it, and I I was just starting because I only got into it. I was in medicine until I was 43. But I realized I have to prepare, and we had to prepare for a handover. And what we were going to hand over, we were going to hand over to sons. Yeah.
So that was an important part. When you
Huge.
shift from corporation
Yep.
structure into facilitating a household of faith.
Yeah.
When we build with the Father heart of God,
Yeah.
and it's the multiplication of sons and
Yeah.
daughters, it is building in
Yes.
kingdom values and principles. Somewhere deep in your heart, there's always a
Yeah.
knowing we're handing this ultimately over
Yeah.
to spiritual sons and
To
daughters.
spiritual sons and daughters who grew up in our house, because that's the principle. I'm not looking for a CEO from across
Yeah.
the world and say who's going to be the best CEO to take over from me, because all of that got changed in the process.
because it's a family thing.
It's a family thing.
So from that time, when you realized that's what needed to happen, did you always and immediately had your son in mind?
No, I can't even remember if he was on staff at that stage. Well, he was. He might have been. He was. Yeah, Keith will perhaps remember. I never called Mark.
Okay.
And in fact, now let me be honest about this. I never wanted this for him. I'm serious. You heard what this man said this morning. You heard what Edna said. I don't want it for my kids. It's crazy.
You're right.
Yeah, I'm serious. Unless God says it.
Yes. You're so right. I remember there was a time where one of my sons came to, because they both are pursuing it as well. And Louis sitting here came to me and said to me, "It seems like you're against me coming into ministry."
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, you don't know what you're getting into."
No, exactly. No, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So
Mark, when did you feel called by God? I mean, growing up with a dad that's a doctor, and then, of course, always been involved, mom and dad, in the church, in leadership, in a great context, and always had a heart for God and the kingdom, and then making that step over into being full-time in that capacity. When did you feel called?
I think if I go back in 95, 96, when I was finishing up school, which is now 20 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, life moves on quickly. But at that time, I think I was already sensing a call of God in my life. And at that stage, my dad discouraged me from it. And in that stage, it was the right thing to do. And he said I need to study, and that was God. So for me, it was kind of a process of having to lay down a dream of ministry to be obedient to God and then to study. And I studied for 3 years. I did commerce and computers. And I worked in my own business for about 7 years.
Can I interrupt you
Yeah.
a little bit there? Do you think it was a good thing for you, even though you felt so strongly called by God, apart from Dad discouraging you, but maybe to go a route where you touch a little bit what's happening in the world and how they think, and was there value in that?
Yeah,
for you?
absolutely. There's nothing wrong with going out of school into seminary and then being launched into ministry, but you don't learn things like faith until you've had your own business and you've got salaries to pay and you don't even know how you're going to pay your creditors, and you've got to get on your knees before God, and you've got to trust Him for the breakthrough, and then you don't get paid for 3 months. That stuff that I had to walk through was better than any seminary for me. It was the university of life that I needed. And I think often we get into ministry, and particularly if you go into a stable situation where there's a salary, we don't realize what people go through in the real world. It's different challenges, but you sometimes need to go through that to cut your teeth on ministry and the stuff you're going to need to carry you through ministry.
And also maybe just a little bit to see how authentic your faith is in and amongst people who don't always believe what you believe, and
Yeah,
always agree and say
absolutely.
amen on everything that you say.
Yeah, absolutely. And to realize how difficult it is to actually live out your faith in the workplace. We preach, touch your communities, touch your world. The truth is, Monday morning, you're at your computer, you can't preach to your colleagues, and there's deadlines and people getting upset with you, and you're dealing with your own frustrations. It's good for me to go back to the time that I was in the workplace, so that I'm now able to practically think about what was it like for me. And when I end my sermons, I can say to people, well, this is how you can perhaps integrate this sermon into your life.
Yes.
But know what they're facing. It becomes a distant memory, but I had some tough times, sitting in front of servers that are breaking down, with creditors calling me for payment, and staff that are unhappy, and just in the midst of all of that, having to find God.
That's good, very good. What I want to also ask you, maybe for some young people or mums and dads that have got kids here that want to do that, how do you prepare yourself while you're busy with this business thing and trying to make all of that happen and still dream the dream about being in ministry? We know that ministry is everywhere, and we're all called ministers in every area, but where you dreamt to be in the church in that context. How did you continue to prepare yourself and get ready for that?
Yeah, well, I think the thing is, God had to keep forcing me to lay the dream down because I think I didn't know what I wanted. I think what I wanted, what I pictured wasn't what it was going to end up being.
Yeah.
And we kind of dream this, life's going to be easier and it's all of that, and you kind of live for that. But I kept on having to make peace with where I was.
Yeah.
So for me, it was an ongoing process of laying the dream down, having to make that sacrifice. Until the day when I got the phone call to come where my dad's 2IC called me. I didn't expect it.
Okay. So let me ask you this. Also, at that time, you were quite actively involved in worship
Yes, absolutely.
in the church while you had your
Absolutely,
business.
Yeah.
And I think what a lot of people don't know is that Mark is quite a phenomenal worship leader and songwriter. And he's, you've launched 2 or 3 CDs, haven't you? 2
yes.
CDs with some great songs on it. And so where did that shift happen where that you might have thought, or did you at any time thought that you might end up just doing worship on the long run while you have business, do worship, or go full-time in just leading worship, and now you end up doing this? Where did that shift happen in your heart?
Yeah, well, as I said, my life's been a process of laying things down. So I came into the admin staff of the church, and while I was doing that, I was working on, part-time working on songs and releasing CDs. I remember at one stage I released the first album, and it didn't really go where I expected it to go. You kind of launch it, and you look at the box of CDs, and you think the world awaits me, and you kind of sell to your own congregation. That's where it ends. And it's very humbling. And I remember saying to God, I'm not going to do the second album until the first album is a success. And then God said to me, no, you're going to do the second album. And so I did that. And in many ways, the journey of that is what God used to prepare me for that. But there was a time when I realized there was a possibility for me for things to go further. I was close to having a song signed by a UK record label, and then I would, in some ways, have some breakthrough in that area of things. And there were doors that I could have pushed open to the guy I was working with to come and travel here in the States. And I remember at one stage, I was saying to him, we need to start doing this. And he just said to me, God's not allowing me to open these doors for you. There's something else waiting for you. And I was cross because, I'd worked my whole life towards that. And then all of a sudden, God said to me, this is what has to happen. And I had to lay down. This is the thing about the kingdom. The kingdom is built on people who have to lay things down to take on something that God wants. So I had to lay that career down. And to be honest, for the last 2 years, I haven't led worship. God's told me to completely lay it down.
Wow.
And I'm trusting for the time I can pick it up, but I haven't got the release yet. So that is a daily walk I have to walk. Yeah.
Well, at the time, when did you come? Did you work? Did you have a business? While you had your business, did you start working in the church, or was there a time that they just called you in and say, "We want you to be involved in a full time"?
I had been serving through the structures independently of my dad. He was very careful not to have any type of nepotism going on. In fact, the joke was, I used to say to the guys that I'll be the last person to be employed by Harvest because my dad will always cut it down. But in a good way, and I thank him for that because he allowed me, what he did in his wisdom was he allowed me to start serving from the bottom.
Yeah.
I served and I led worship for the children's ministry, for the youth, and then into senior worship, and then I started leading some small groups and then started working on CDs. But I just served in and amongst the church through the other structures, but I was always doing that. I've always worked for the church in that way. I just was never paid to do it in many ways. It was part of my life. Yeah.
Fantastic. John, there came a day that you sat down with some of the leaders and you said, we're going to have to some other time work on the succession plan.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah, it was very intentional. Let me just say that. I don't think we can assume that a succession plan will just happen. I've now walked with too many churches outside of that where there just wasn't anything in the wings to happen. And so we called, in the end it was 4 young guys who came in. And Keith and Don Buerta were part of that process. And we said, and Jean is here today, he was one of those as well. We had Mark and Jean and Grant Walters and Dave Walland and then there were other guys around as well, but those 4 came on staff. Now we had the privilege of having a large staff, and that always helps because these guys were now full-time. And in my heart, I knew one of those 4 would ultimately lead the team, And I also knew I was not going to hand over to one man in the sense of, I think we often assume that there's going to be one guy that takes over. We always plan to hand over to a team. I believe it's a good New Testament model. But I knew that somebody needed to lead that team, and it needed to be strong leadership, and God would show us who it would be. And so we were never, I was never sure who that leader was going to be. Mark was called to be the administrator. It was, in retrospect, a great training ground for him. But when we got to about 3 years ago, just in a deep time of prayer, I felt God said to me very clearly, it's time to hand over. It's time now, and you need to hand over to Mark. And then, as a father, you realize this whole nepotism thing. How do I get this through to? This is what God's told me. I know this has got to happen, but how do I make it happen without pushing an agenda that appears to be coming from a dad in the natural?
Let's step back before you actually take us through that little final door that you went through. There was a season that this great team that have now taken over, by the grace of God, changed this whole church around into a wonderful body, beautiful family, got great momentum, and you know exactly what God's doing and where He's taking you. And may I say, and then you appoint these 4 clever guys to join the team.
They stretched us. I mean,
explain the word stretch to us, the Greek meaning of stretch. When you know what you're doing. I mean, you know what you're doing.
We know what...
And they know better.
Well, it's a bit like Louis was saying, when you put teenagers in and then they start challenging everything that you ever thought, and we watched them come through. I mean, we had some great discussions, but what I did is I actually brought them into the eldership meetings. They sat through for 7 years. These guys sat through every eldership meeting with us.
Were they allowed to say anything?
They were allowed to say anything, but they weren't allowed to vote because they weren't elders. But we never voted. So, but they sat. But
just in case they think there was going to be a vote.
Yeah, just in case they thought there was going to be a vote, they didn't have a vote. And that's how they. I think you can train people in one of 3 ways. You can sit them down and teach them a dogma, go through, or you can drop them in the deep end, and just let them get on with it, see if they sink or swim, or you can say, "Come and walk with me." And I think that's what we did. That's what works for me, is to say, just come and walk with me. So they walked with us, they lived life with us, and after 7 years, they knew what we knew, and they'd been through all of the decision-making. Yeah.
Oh, you're so nice, John, and I mean, I always say, sometimes you're almost nicer than Jesus. Are there times, Mark, that walking with one another frustrated you a little bit? And we're not going to speak on behalf of the others as well.
Maybe you should ask John as well.
Have there been times? I'm not trying to be cruel in my questioning, but I'm trying to say, are there times that even though here's a father and a son that love one another, you understand him, he understands you, you know where you're going, but sometimes there's just an angle that you've got that the older guys don't get, or there's some stuff that the older guys got that these young guys haven't got a cooking clue what they're doing, and they're just trying to be smart. You know what I'm saying? I just want to kind of pull a little bit of that there, because there are transitions that need to happen. There are some handing overs that need to take place, and there are contentions there sometimes. And it's like Louis said, if it's only always wonderful, it doesn't mean it's horribly bad, but there are just times that are just not as smooth as we think.
I now know why I should have put money on the table before the interview started. So now he's not holding back. I think just 2 things. The first thing was it was set up in a way that I didn't really report directly into my dad, which was a good thing. I reported into one of the other elders. We had a lot of dialogue, but we weren't on a daily basis having to bounce things off each other, which I think might have been difficult. And that was a very good move on his part. Overall, I think what you walk through is let me just say this. In the beginning, you don't know what the senior leader is going through. So a lot of stuff I realized, I thought, well, why did he do this? Why does that not happen? And I realized now, having been in this position, it's like when you're younger, when you grow up, you think your parents are wonderful. When they become teenagers, then they don't know anything. And then when you're back in your 40s again, you realize they did actually know what was going on. That's the journey of life. And you guys will see that, I'm sure. But I'm still a hero at home for now. I've got maybe 3 years left, so I'm going to milk it. My sons are heading towards teenagers as well, yeah. But I think it's the thing of watching them do life, and also, you know, I think my frustrations were sometimes is I would go to him and say, you know, I really think this word God's given me is like where the church is going, and I would share with it, and he wouldn't do anything with it. And I think that was for me, you know, and then I realized now in this position, you get lots of people giving you words, and I suddenly realized, well, I think if God wants to change the direction of the church, he'll speak to the guy that can actually do that. He's not going to speak to someone that hasn't got a clue. The people will bring words to confirm what is being said. And just as a little side note, that is the thing. For me, the most powerful prophetic words are when people come and confirm what God's already been speaking to us as an eldership, not taking us on a tangent we didn't even think about. But we had to learn, I think, over that period of time we were being giving some of the reins to explore and we were given incredible freedom in our portfolios,
Yes.
but we didn't have the reins that we could make all the changes and little things perhaps we would like to
But
have
there
done.
were those moments that
Yeah.
at times
Yeah.
that you would thought, man, if only they would do this, the church would be better. Or if only they would just get what we're saying, we could just grow it much faster.
Let me be honest, there were some moments like that, but
Yeah.
but
They
but
didn't
the,
last
but the
too
incredible thing about the journey we had is that for those 7 years, and it takes a very humble leader to do this. My dad and that team didn't rush out and even do major changes without bringing us on the journey, because this was a critical thing, is their feeling was this. They knew they were going to hand over to us one day. They didn't want us to inherit a ship that we weren't part of building.
Yeah.
In other words, they didn't want to hand over to us, and then 7 years later, we go, oh, thank goodness the old guys are gone. Let's do what we always wanted to do.
Yeah.
We were involved in the nuts and
Fantastic.
bolts
It's beautiful.
for
Isn't that
those
powerful?
7 years.
Is that beautiful?
Yeah.
I think there's a great secret here. There's a great principle here. If you engage people in the process, they get familiar with the entire ship and what's happening, and we change it together. John, I remember some conversation we had. There came a day that hands were shaken and prayers were being prayed, and then there was a day that they had an elders meeting, and you know exactly what had to happen. They just didn't invite you into the elders meeting. What was that like?
Yeah, you know, for me, it wasn't that difficult. When I look back now, you know, having groomed them for 7 years,
Yeah,
they made the right decisions.
yeah,
And I totally was able to trust them and step out of it.
yes.
And I've not watched them flounder in it. They've actually, it's been an incredible story. And I can say today, these guys, you know, they made the decisions that we would have made because they'd been part of that journey. Was it difficult to not be part of it? Yeah, I must be honest.
Because
Extremely difficult.
Scholtz, I'm going to say something.
You can. Come and, of course you've got a place. Come and stand here with us.
No.
No. Come and stand here.
I was to say something.
Okay.
Yeah, just on that thing, I just feel I need to say this because it might help somebody who's going to go through the same thing. I imagined that I would walk for a year with these young girls. They were going to come and ask me for advice. I'd been doing all these organizing things. They were going to ask me all these things. And I realized a couple of months down the line that actually they hadn't come and asked me anything. And I was highly disappointed and highly offended that nobody had come to me. And it was at that point I had to make a decision that either I'm going to live in the offense and the self-pity and spiral into depression, or make the choice that God told us to hand over the church. And at that point, I rejoiced that actually they don't need me, and that set me free. And now I rejoice in what the young folk are doing. There's no jealousy, there's nothing, because God had spoken. So if that helps.
Wonderful, Jen. Thank you for that. You know what? Thank you for that. That was so important that you shared your part and your role in this whole deal as well. John, and I think I'm not trying to push for anything. I'm trying to ask for the reality of
The
it, because
reality of it,
I know the beauty of it. But you know, there are guys like me, like I'm like 17 years, 20 years younger than you.
Yes.
And this thing might happen like
Might
in
happen to
30
you one
years
day, yeah.
in our lifetime.
Yeah.
And you are so involved, and I know how passionate you are about the kingdom,
Yeah.
and I know you love the church.
Yeah.
And you've given yourself. I mean, you had a wonderful career, You didn't have to come into ministry. You were on a roll, and at times people almost think, but you're kind of on the prime now. Why do you want to hand it over already? And you've done, and then all of a sudden you're out of it. And then maybe there's somebody that needs to hear that here to say, don't fall into that place of depression. Don't allow the enemy in what Jane has said.
Let me
That's
say,
so real.
If there was anything that caught me by surprise, was the fact that I felt such a sense of loss.
Yeah. So that is real.
Yeah, it's very
I mean,
real.
you're there. It's your son. You part. You're going there.
Sure.
And you still feel.
And I've stayed on in the eldership in this that they consider me the kind of apostolic elder, for want of a better word. But I'll go into a meeting once a month now, and but they don't make decisions in that meeting.
That's when they give you coffee and
They give me
biscuits.
coffee and biscuits. So we have and ask me what I've been doing, so they can kind of, and we delight in what they're doing.
Yeah.
But the loss was, I miss the team. I miss the life of, because we travel a lot now.
Yes.
I miss the life of the local church,
Yeah.
and and quite honestly, it was a wonderful place to be, leading a large church with,
Yeah, of course, yes.
I don't get a say over that budget anymore. I've stayed on the finance team just to help because of experience is a great benefit there, but I'm not making the decisions. And so that sense of loss was huge. It caught me by surprise, and I had in my heart thought I would only hand over when I was closer to 70. I was 61 at the time, and God said it's time, and so
Here you are.
here I am.
But it's also opened up brand new doors.
It's
and
opened up new
opportunity-
doors.
And a new lease of life
Yeah.
and purpose. Mark, for you as a team, how do you feel to have Dad there? And is there an awareness of that you've got the liberty to do what you want to do, but deliberately involve him because of the role and the function that he plays?
Yeah, I
Help
think
us
he
with that.
maybe underplays his role a little bit. So yes, he's released the decision making to us, and I think that is a key thing, because so often you can hand over the gun without bullets, and that's very frustrating.
That's a good quote. I
Um,
will remember that. Some
so-
guy hand over the guns with bullets, but they're blanks.
Just make a lot of noise, yeah. But you know what the thing of this, and I guess it's what we teach in terms of the apostolic input, is it's invited in. So we constantly invite, and I constantly invite that input. We won't launch into any major decision. We recently had to employ someone to replace Prodigal over there, and no, I'm joking. Jean, we needed to find someone to take over his role, and he will join us in November. But I said to my dad, I would like you to have coffee with this guy, and I want you to connect with him because I want to know what you think.
Yeah.
We are looking at a building program now, and so I said to my dad, this is what we're kind of sensing, and he said, that's great. And so I've invited that because at the end of the day, that is a much more healthy model, because I don't walk in there feeling like he's trying to squash what I'm doing, but I want his blessing. Either we believe this apostolic stuff or we don't.
Exactly.
And I want his blessing, and he's got a wealth of experience. He has the joy now of being a grandfather in the house. He is a grandfather to the congregation. I'm now the father, but he walks in there as the grandfather. And as those of you grandparents know, I'm told, it's a lot more fun with grandkids because you don't pick up the problems. You can enjoy the fun part and then hand them over to the parents.
Amen.
They say, being a grandparent is a reward for not killing your children. So, but he's walking in the blessing of that. And when he comes and shares, he shares now apostolic messages and things that kind of shift the people. But they look to him as a grandfather. They won't involve him in problems now. He's handed over us to change the nappies now. But he still gets to see us walk in the fullness of dreams that God gave him. Even some weren't fulfilled in his tenure in that time. But he's going to watch the sons receiving those dreams. And just as a little side note for those of you who go through it, I've lived with this understanding that there are things that I will walk in favor that I didn't earn, and I will receive the promises and the fulfillment of promises that were given to someone else. And I will receive promises that I won't see fulfilled, the next generation will see fulfilled. And if we can live in the joy and the understanding of that, we won't be frustrated. We can live in contentment. But I want him to see us accomplish some of the things that God gave him in his heart and have the joy of being a part of that. Yeah.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. In closing, are we running out of time? In closing, just maybe in closing, some of the things that you would do different. I mean, there was a process that you walked through. You have invited a group of young men coming in. They became leaders that you groomed and growed. They eventually came onto staff. There's a process that I've walked through, and I think we hear the evidence and sense the evidence and see the evidence of something that is working wonderfully, something that you would have done different.
Yeah, I'm not, when I look back now, it has just been an incredible experience, and I'm really, as a dad, I mean, I rejoice. Yeah. Not just in my biological son, but in my spiritual sons. I mean, they have just done so well. And I don't know that there is anything I would do differently. It was by God's grace that we did it, and we got it right. I think the most difficult part for me was handing over to my own biological son and knowing that of those that I had, that we'd been raising, that he was the one whom God put his finger on and said, he's going to lead the team. And so in the working through of that, I might have, in retrospect, been able to do that with slightly less trauma to myself. Because I tried to, it's the kind of thing where you want everybody to speak, but know that because I'm the leader, I'm going to significantly influence what happens. And so I try to not do that. And it was the only time really that I can remember we had a serious vote in our eldership. I said to you, we'd never voted. We've always just worked on consensus. And so what I did is I actually said to them, look, because of the situation, because Mark's involved, I want everyone to actually just write a name on a piece of paper of who should take over. Because I can't, I don't want to influence this thing. And, when the pieces of paper came in, Mark's was the only name on there. And he needed to know that, and I needed to know that.
That's beautiful.
But we didn't manipulate it. It was a God thing,
Encourage some people out there. Tell them what to remember. Tell them these are the 2 or 3 things that you need to remember when you get ready to do your succession plan and the kind of man or the kind of team that you're looking for.
Yeah, I would say this to you. It has to be intentional. Don't imagine this thing's just going to happen. And you need to ask God for the wisdom of how it's going to work for you. This is how it worked for us. I'm not convinced that there's only one path for this. I've had a lot of discussion with guys, even from New Covenant, NCMI. I've done a lot of church planting and a lot of handovers. We've watched in our own midst as to how that happens. And my persuasion is this: I don't think it's dependent upon a particular pattern as it is upon personalities. I have, by nature, not been aggressively top-down in who I am, and so I've stayed on and been part of the team and continued, with them. If you're somebody that is not able to get out of the way, then you need to change, go and live somewhere else, because you're going to get in the way. And if you're going to be frustrated by that, then plan your succession for you to get out of the way so that you're not going to be there and have something to go on to. I've had the privilege of continuing in an apostolic life now, which has been rewarding. It's taken me about 2 years. We've just gone now 2 years, and I think for the first time now I'm starting to feel again the kind of, not security. I've had to find my security in Christ totally
your
again.
Rhythm.
My rhythm is, I'm finding my rhythm. I'm finding my rhythm now, and I think we've come to a place of peace in that, and we're living, we're living a wonderful season. But in the succession plan, if you are a really strong top-down leader, get out of the way when you hand over, because you're going to mess up for the guys that you leave behind. If you're able to, which is my nature, this is the thing, my nature is not, I'm a team man. I received, when I got the handover, I received a corporate structure where I was the president at the top, and whatever I said went, and what I left behind was a team, and so I handed over to a team. And we had a leader of a team. And, you know, Tony always talks about, are you a team with a leader or you are a leader with a team? Big difference. So we handed over to a team, and Mark became the leader of that team. And I'm still part of that team from an advisory capacity on the side, but they know that they have the freedom to do whatever they need to do. I think those are important issues. If I had been somebody who, because of my nature, had to be involved in everything, had to still control these guys and make sure that they were doing the right thing, it would have been better if we moved to Jeffries and came and gave you guys trouble. You know.
2 questions, Mark, to you, maybe just in closing. Did you inherit the same eldership? Did you change anything, and how's that working for you?
It was, yeah, these guys who are on the team now, they were made elders, I think, 2 years before the handover.
So you were familiar with them?
We'd worked together. I think a lot of, if I must be honest, a lot of the kind of tensions and working through life that you asked me before, a lot more of that was worked out at our level as peers and learning to find each other. But, so the incredible thing was when we took over as a young team, we knew each other's quirks, we knew each other's sweet spots, we knew where the strengths were. So when I took the team over and I had to do some changes and put people into positions, I knew all of the guys well. I wasn't having to guess what they would be strong at. I'd managed to see that. And again, I come back to the intentional journey. This wasn't something, we get asked, how are you going to do this? We get asked for advice. And I realize it's very difficult to kind of repeat that. And it's very difficult, let me say this, to give people advice when it's like has to happen in the next 2 years. This started 9 years, in fact 9 years ago it started. It was a very intentional process. So what was the other question?
The second question is, talk to some of the young guys. When you come as a young team onto an existing strong team, thriving church, and you want to change the world and change the church, and it doesn't always happen instantly. What's some advice? How do you operate as a young team and as a young person, young leader on a team, and you know there's some things in my heart, I want to change this place that these older guys are not seeing, and how do you approach that? What are some of the tips that you want to give them out there and say, remember this, remember these 3 or 4 things?
I think the worst thing you can do is come in and from day one start changing everything. I think, and let me just say, we'd already started making some changes already. What we took over was already starting to look like very much what we were wanting to build because we were involved in that process. But I think I've watched.
Just let me say that.
Yeah.
So what avoided you trying to change everything is that you got invited into the process.
That's it.
That's an important statement.
That is, yeah.
The reason why you didn't try to change everything is because you got invited into the process.
Yeah.
Okay?
So we didn't take something over, as I said earlier, and go, oh, well, great, we've got the reins, let's make this into what we wanted. It already looked a lot like what we wanted. There was a season where we just, in many ways, I guess, were holding fort, and we were watching, and I was having to find my feet. I think you come in, and it's disrespectful to all those that have been before just to suddenly make massive changes. Unless the ship is sinking, let me say that. You've got to also look at what you're coming into. There is a time when the ship is sinking, and you need someone with a certain...
Things are not healthy.
And they've got to pull things right. And we've seen those situations, and that's necessary. You've got to judge carefully what you're taking over. We were not taking over a sinking ship. In fact, the joke I said with the guys is, this thing's doing so well, we don't want to be known as the guys that sunk the ship. So it was a different type of setting, but it definitely helps to sit, watch, learn, because I didn't know everything. You have to just be honest, and you think you know what it takes, but it takes time to know what you need to change and what you need to leave. And I would generally discourage people from walking in and just sweeping clean, because there are a lot of people that are very valuable, who have a lot of wisdom, and if you push things too hard, you're going to lose them. We amazingly, I don't think, lost any of our old folk. Even though, and I said to the guys, there was a line we pushed in terms of change. We got right up to the line, but if we'd crossed the line a little bit more, we might have started to lose people. But we were very intentional not to push it too quickly, too fast, too quickly, that we would lose ground. So that was our story.
I heard some of these old grannies say he doesn't just preach better than you, he looks better than you too.
They come up to me and they say, oh, Pastor John, your son has done so well. That message he preached, Not that we don't love you.
Don't you want to give John and Mark a great hand this morning? God bless you.